notes.
Oh, hold on. We're live now. We're live. All right. Give people just a minute to tune in. I'm wearing a hat tonight. This is a casual stream as we come into the end of the week. All right. Looks like we've got some viewers. Good evening and welcome back to Kyle Hooten Live, presented by Alpha News. As always, I'm your host. Tonight we are joined by John Gilmore, a repeat guest on the show. Last time we had him on, it was a fantastic conversation, but we didn't get to finish. We didn't get to talk about everything we wanted to talk about. So we're having him back now and we're very glad for it. John, thanks for joining us.
Thanks again very much, Kyle, for having me back. Unfortunately, not much has happened between the time I was on first and today. So
I've got a couple news things I want to get your opinion on. I guess we can start with those.
What I wanted to do was
Sure.
talk about what I thought was, I'll be doing a little bit of driving here, Kyle. So
Okay.
For those who aren't on Twitter, I tweeted that I was coming in hot to the show tonight, just because I had a lot of things that I wanted to cover. But you can always reach over and turn the steering wheel if there's some things that you really wanted to get to.
Sure.
In that first session. But since we last talked, Kyle, some of the most important things I think that have happened. One is Tucker Carlson mainstreamed in an incredible monologue and show, what many of us on the right have known about for some time, and that's called demographic replacement.
Yep.
And that's akin to the East German communist playwright Bertolt Brecht, who has, I think it's in the Three Penny Opera or something, it's time to elect a new people. And that's exactly what's going on. And Tucker couches it in terms of the devaluation and diminishment of the vote, which it certainly is that, but there's also a racial component about it. And it's very explicit in terms of driving down the overall percentage of white people.
Yes.
Last time I checked, the country was founded by white people and their progeny, but you get into all sorts of trouble if you are that explicit. So there's some carping on the right that he doesn't go there. And really these people are asking him to, embrace the power transformer and electrocute himself. It's really very sloppy in terms of strategy and tactics. But what he did was allow everyone to talk about it, even couched within the rhetorical garb of vote diminution. And he still, of course, gets dragged, but that's what they like to do. What's particularly nauseating to someone like me is you see Charlie Kirk, that creature of the boomer waffen, and Turning Point USA immediately pick up on those talking points when just last year they were dragging and excoriating and calling, they may as well be leftists, Nick Fuentes every name in the book, and he's with America First. You can like him or you cannot. It's just like food or books or taste in the woman that you'd like to date or whatever. But there is this vehemence that the people on the right, the gatekeepers on the right, have picked up, and it's pretty unedifying to see the sheer hypocrisy. Michelle Malkin, Bronze that woman, has been a very strong supporter of Nick, and it's a simple free speech issue. So it's a bit uncomfortable when we rely on fellow people, men and women on the right, who aren't all in on free speech, because that's the key issue, I think, for the country, not just the right going forward.
Just really quick here. I want to provide some context to our viewers. If you're just tuning in, we're on the line with John Gilmore. What John just mentioned with Nick Fuentes, he leads a group called America First. They have a nightly streaming show that's significantly larger than this one, hosted on their own proprietary platform. He was recently banned from flying on airplanes.
You're stealing my thunder, Kyle. Thanks. That was.
Sorry about that. But
I'm giving you a bad. I'm going to be giving you a bad time.
Sure. But he can't fly anymore. But he really was catapulted into the headlines last year when he took on Turning Points in a very head-on, very direct approach, and he basically said, exactly, the Groyper War. And he said, Turning Point's talking about the wrong issues. We need to talk about these other cultural problems, even demographic replacement. Tucker has now picked up that mantle, which has brought Fuentes's rhetoric sort of into the mainstream. And now people are accepting him. But for literally years, this guy was like a pariah on the right, and Charlie Kirk and these other figures would admonish him at every turn. Just a little bit of background for those who aren't familiar with Fuentes.
Well done, sir. And what you leave out for the boomer audience, I'm an apostate boomer, Nick has a very strong following among the younger set. It's very encouraging. Sometimes people in my age group will despair. And there are some really hopeful signs when you go further down the, life chart. And that, I think, is the promise. I think it's incumbent on people 50 and over, let's say, to really find out who those people are, men and women, and support them. Throw whatever weight you can behind them, whether it's simply supporting them on social media or throwing them a few bucks, because fingers crossed, if we're lucky, if we get out of the mess that we currently find ourselves in, they're going to be leading the way. Maybe even after we're gone, which is, I'll take it, I'll take it. The no-fly list, though, is profoundly disturbing, because you're being punished purely for political speech. And people on the right had better wake up that it's just a matter of sequencing. It's Nick first and you later, because once that train leaves the station, they want to take out all of the enemies. Well, how do you define an enemy, Gilmore, says the boomer?
Everybody. It's everybody who's not them.
How about if you voted for Trump? There's 74 million of us.
Yep.
And that's how, and just as a helpful aid, people listening and watching this might want to have a piece of scrap paper and a pen. There's no homework, there's no test, but there's a couple of places that you might want to write some things down for further reflection. And then, of course, there was the George Floyd verdict, or as Ann Coulter, who, when she's right, she's very right. She's frequently quite wrong, in my opinion. But we're all a mixed bag, aren't we? She called him a human sacrifice. I just haven't been able to move past it. And he's in solitary confinement as we sit, 23/24, 7 days a week. I don't care left, right, or center, the most violent crime or armed robbery. Prolonged solitary confinement is a human rights abuse. It's, for my way of thinking, that barbaric, but there's Derek Chauvin.
And ironically, the only people speaking out against that are on the left. You've got two leftist senators speaking out against solitary confinement in the both case of Chauvin and in the case of the Capitol rioters / protesters who are also in solitary confinement.
You're really leapfrogging over my notes.
I can anticipate where you're going.
But yeah, see, and that's just it. There's going to be a lot of different threads. And if people just sort of hang on, with Kyle's help, who does it sometimes quite masterfully, and I'm not a suck up, Kyle, I'm just not. You're another white pill. I've described you to others as such.
I appreciate that.
You should. Well, and I mean it, because I'm not from Minnesota, so I'm not fake or passive aggressive and that sort of thing. But it's like, holy, you know what? There's some hope here. It's ridiculous. And then I made my debut at the American Conservative. I wrote a piece called Minneapolis After the Verdict. It's, as the word debut may imply, my first time at that particular rodeo. For people who may not know, that's Rod Dreher and his group. They're a particular kind of conservative. They're on the right. And I was grateful for the opportunity to have a byline there. I think there's better, more insightful, more acute insights and fighters than they constitute. But I think I said last time, I'm trying my best not to punch right going forward, because I'm going to be going back to what you and Devin talked about, news silos and why did the left drop its mask and so on. I have the answer, I think, or I'll throw it over to you and see what you say. But we're at war. We're at war. That's the best way to think about it. They're coming for you and yours of any color. Lots of those 74 million people weren't white Americans. And the Hispanic numbers have caused a bit of indigestion on the left, the smarter people, because they saw those numbers, even though the election was stolen and rigged. I've got to go. The police are at my door. Steve Simon has sent the police for questioning the validity of the last national election.
Yeah, you're going to be in federal custody.
Yeah, following that, Michael Tracy, who is a very interesting writer, he's on Substack, and he's on Tucker Carlson Tonight quite frequently. He breezed into town, and in a day's worth of tweets, shamed our pathetic local media, who basically function as scriveners of whatever DFL government official has put out for the day, and they call it their job. And he talked about the astronomical increase in the murder rate in Minneapolis, and he talked to people in those communities where it's happening. And no I don't want to take anything away from Michael Tracy, but on the other hand, it wasn't that difficult. All they had to do was get off their backside and do what he did. He doesn't have any sort of magic ability, a stranger to the Twin Cities, to generate this. He's got the will.
And within like 6 hours of being on the ground, I don't know exactly, but within a day of being on the ground, he was literally at the scene of a homicide, talking to people who watched the shooting transpire. So this guy who's not from Minneapolis, within hours is running laps around Minneapolis media, which, to your point, shows that they're not really interested in covering the crime. They don't really care.
Well, they do if it's a white person. I'm sorry to be
True.
saying it that way, but just follow some of those beat reporters and compare it and contrast it to Crime Watch Minneapolis, and you'll see the difference.
Yeah.
Well, finally, almost finally, I was getting a haircut. I have a haircut story. And I thought of you, and I thought, I'm going to talk to Kyle about this. Long story short, when I walked in, 16-year-old kid was getting his haircut. His dad was waiting. He bounded up and said, "So you think masks are ridiculous too?" And shoved his hand out.
Yeah.
And we were off to the races. He was taller than I was. I take note of that infrequent occurrence. And he was Irish. So it was like, this mutual train wreck for about 15 or 20 minutes in the salon of two blackguards, as they might say. I tried to introduce him to the different nomenclature, and I talked about the cathedral, bio-Leninism, and anarcho-tyranny, which we had touched on last time. By this time, both of them were named Vincent, senior and junior. Dad was one of 14 children born in St. Paul. I mean, there's a story right there. It wouldn't be Angela Ashes if I wrote it. But Vincent Jr. had sort of sashayed over where I was being almost finished with my haircut. And I had just said those three terms. And he says, "Oh, Mencius moldbug." 16 years old. The further downstream you go, ladies and gentlemen, there's hope. I was completely blown away. It was mold bug in the wild. And then the next day, I got a text from the guys who do my yard. They just started last year, hell of a year to start a business, blue collar, hardworking. And this guy was texting me up to the minute about what was going on, and through the red-pilled lens. I wasn't feeding him anything. So there's something that's going on that's getting a very different assessment and apprehension of current circumstances that I don't think older people on the right know about, and therefore they can't appreciate it. But it's anecdotal, but it's some very interesting stuff that I think legitimates being mildly optimistic. And then finally, Tucker trashed Frank once, and half the country stood up and cheered.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so embarrassing, Kyle. It's just the Republican Party so embarrassing, And then, to top it off with Kevin McCarthy being a roommate, let 1,000 jokes bloom. I mean, they write themselves. You can't help but laugh. Now that's when Milo should have been on Twitter for just that moment.
I know.
It would have been hilarious. And that's a good segue, though, to the more current stuff with the Republican Party, which is it needs to be dismantled and rebuilt. Ned said we need to keep the storefront and basically replace the inventory. And I thought that was a fine analogy.
The branding is worthwhile. People know that when they see Republican, that's who they've been voting for the last couple of decades. But the ideology is completely rotten, at least the people who purport to defend the ideology.
Well, and here's Exhibit A. You've got Liz Cheney in the process of being taken out, apparently, from leadership, and they want to replace her with Elise Stefanik, who's worse than Liz Cheney. It shows contempt for the base. I don't think these people are salvageable. And I usually name names, I won't, but I see very senior staffers in the House and Senate Republican caucus cheering on Liz Cheney. Cool. Glad to know that those people are in touch with what a lot of Minnesota Republican voters are thinking. And then to compound matters, it begs disbelief. Bruce Jenner, because Caitlyn Jenner doesn't exist, and people getting behind Bruce masquerading as a woman for governor of California. And I only saw clips, merciful God, of Jenner on Sean Hannity, who's unwatchable. And I've called you, Kyle, the anti-Sean Hannity, because you don't.
I strive to
interrupt.
be.
Yeah, you don't interrupt. You'll jump in and say, "Yeah, John, what about this or that?" Completely different.
Yeah.
And I think to myself, it's a lost cause with that mindset of the Republican Party. No personal animosity toward Jenner whatsoever, but he's a father of 6 children and an Olympian. And now we're under the guise of maybe we'll have a chance to win the governorship of California. We're being asked to buy into the most profound gaslighting and betrayal, really a form of mental illness. And I think it indicts those levers and organs and institutional levers of the Republican Party that so many, too many, seem willing to happily embrace.
Do you think we're going to see a Trump endorsement in the case of the whole Jenner situation? Because I've seen some people that are kind of affiliated with Trump or that have acted as Trump surrogates in the past endorsing wholeheartedly on Twitter. What do you think Trump's going to do himself?
Well, if he can keep away from Brad Parscale, who I think is like, Bad Penny has returned, or Jared Kushner and Javanka, he should let it play out and see, who else gets in. Right now, a little bit of Trump for me is going a long way. He announced this big social media thing, and it's a blog. I felt I was back into like 2007, 2008, Mr. President.
Yeah, it's a bit peculiar. And I've seen some people suggesting that there's more coming, but I'm not seeing it yet.
To quote Joan Rivers, can we talk, Mr. President? Can we talk? Because, somebody needs to set you straight on that. And now to go to part of my thunder that you stole. Where's Tom Emmer? Where's Michelle Fischbach? Where's Pete Stauber? Where's Jim? I married Jennifer Carnahan, it's true, Hagedorn, when it comes to people in solitary confinement for months on end, and the only charge is a misdemeanor.
Yeah.
While we see murderers, rapists, looters, and arsonists spun out in 24 hours or less. It's obscene.
And you're not exaggerating there at all. There's been this string of Black people beating Asian people recently. And one of the most shocking videos that came out, I think early this morning or late last night, shows a Black man beating an Asian woman senseless with both fists. And it's come out that he was recently released after being arrested for armed robbery. So this guy's arrested for armed robbery, in a matter of days is released, and then immediately goes out and assaults somebody, apparently under racial motivation. And he's free to walk. But as you point out, people who are facing trespassing charges, disorderly conduct charges, are in solitary confinement in federal prison. They're not at their local county jail. I mean, they're doing, they're in there with really awful people.
It's the single greatest indictment of the Republican Party extant that you could possibly think of. They have abandoned people who believe in what they peddled and sold, what their consultants sold them. And these people are abject cowards. It's enough to make me, spit. And to be fair to the 4 Republican members of Congress from Minnesota, they're in good company. Kevin McCarthy, where are you? Mitch McConnell, any of these people. There's a few people, but what's galling is Pocahontas and Senator Dick Durbin have come out and said, as we look at the charges, we're just seeing like misdemeanor trespasses, and we know what that means. And this is how American citizens are being treated, given the relatively inconsequential charge. So you know that your party is rotten to the core when 2 very liberal Democrats, to their credit, jump over the party divide and say, we really shouldn't be treating Americans like this.
One thing I want to push back on is I don't want to give them too much credit, because I really think that they're doing it for the media moment, and because this has been a huge issue for them for like decades. They're both anti-solitary confinement people. And I see this more as just a way for them to keep pushing their agenda and grab headlines than genuine care for these disenfranchised middle Americans that were at the Capitol.
I think that's a cope on your part, because you can't explain why Republicans who support solitary.
Well, I can't explain why. It's because they don't want to take responsibility. They wind people up to get votes. They don't believe what they're selling them. They disappoint them for 4 years. They block President Trump from being President Trump, and then they don't even want to clean up the mess once it's all over. I mean, I'll indict them wholeheartedly, but I'll also look with a little bit of skepticism at these libs. I really do think they're doing it more to push their own agenda. Well, I mean, I appreciate them doing that.
I'm in the school of right thing, wrong reason. I don't care. You ended up doing the right thing.
Fair enough.
That's
Pragmatic.
kind of where I am with the practicality of politics. And I had to laugh because, as people may know, Tucker Carlson has started his own program on Fox Nation, hour long and so on. I don't think I'm the only boomer who is being bled dry at $6 a month just for Tucker. I mean, that's really enough. And he had Marjorie Taylor Greene on, and he'll do excerpts from the longer show on his evening broadcast. And it was remarkable. She's so straightforward. I don't know a great deal about her myself, except to know a conservative when in the process of being slimed, as she was. And she talked about the numbing mediocrity of most members of Congress. She was actually slightly flabbergasted that these people, had the personality of a wet paper bag, and life skills of, a stale bagel. It was really kind of interesting that someone who's, quote, normal from the outside got to look in and said, boy, we're in trouble, just based on those members. I think that's kind of interesting.
They're not like real human beings. That term gets thrown around a lot among sort of my younger generation when we talk about politics. People talk about who's a real human and who's not. And that's just sort of a way to talk about populism, is who is on the people's side, who understands how to talk and interact, and who's doing it just as a show. And I think it's a very poignant indictment of the fact that these people, they're just plastic automatons. They get rolled out to collect votes and money. So I'm glad Green is calling them on it.
Yeah, I was too, Kyle. And they don't believe in anything. And it's a business model. It's a job. Most of them would be overwhelming, crushed failures in the private sector.
Yes.
Government attracts the opposite of the best and brightest. That was back in the day. And even then it was a bit of a conceit, but it was certainly more true then than it is now. So I'm going to use your platform, Kyle, to make not a mea culpa, but a reassessment.
Sure.
And it's back to our friend Nick. And you can think this is my personal take. You think about something the way that you do because of the reasons hopefully you can articulate, and that would include people in public life. I did not have a good opinion of Candace Owens. I knew where she came from. I know about social autopsy. And I thought, boy, she figured out where the money was. And all the people who are afraid of being called a racist, like John Hinderrocker at the Center of American Experiment, who's had her there not once, not twice, but three times at 5 figures a pop. And I don't mean $10,001. It's insurance. She's almost a human shield. I'm not racist. Okay, stop, just say it, but they'll go on to say, I went and saw Candace Owens. That kind of boomer mindset of timidity.
Yeah.
On her show, she brought up Nick Fuentes and defended him vigorously. That was impressive.
I saw that. She did. I was very surprised. Shocked.
I was too. And I was public on Twitter. I said, this is impressive, and I need to reassess my view of this woman. So God bless her.
Yeah.
Maybe, she's developing in ways that we wouldn't have expected, Kyle, given, sort of the, easy, she's like easy listening music politically for boomers or something.
Yeah.
And Plagues, it was always cringe, that hardly moved in 2020. And, it's kind of a grift. But that's how it is.
And to people who might not be on Twitter a ton or understand the whole Fuentes phenomenon, he is a third rail in politics. Even now that he's getting discussion. I mean, if you tweet about him, you risk getting banned. If you talk about him like we're doing, you risk being ostracized, losing future job opportunities in politics. I mean, he is like a
verboten.
He was a pariah before. He's still a pariah now, even though we can discuss him a little bit. But to see her go out on a limb and actually say after he was banned from flying, this is wrong, we need to stick up for him, is incredible. It's very difficult to understate the magnitude of her doing that.
I would agree with that. And I can't help but know, who's never done that for anyone, let alone Nick Fuentes?
Charlie Kirk.
Well, yes. The Mr. Potato Head. Ann Coulter. Yeah.
I don't keep up with her enough to know, so I'll take your word for it for now.
Yeah. No, Ann's done well looking out for Ann. So, like I say, when she's right, she's very right, but there's a lot of times where you sort of
correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't followed her career arc too closely. Was she relatively early in talking about some of these issues that the America First crowd is now talking about?
In some ways, but in a way that you had to decode. if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
She would go so far, but no further, and would hope that her readers would make the requisite inferences from what she put out there. But she did give us Adios America, and documented the Mexicans and people from South America coming into this country and trashing it. They're litter bugs. That's an old-fashioned term, but they are. They have no idea. They have no environmental consciousness. And liberals think this is going to be somehow a huge addition to a melting pot that stopped melting a long time ago, and it's going to be a net benefit. It's not.
That's a really good way to put it. I want to zoom in on that for a second. The melting pot isn't melting anymore. It's solid. It's now just a scrap heap. The groups and the people don't meld together. They don't come together. That doesn't occur. They stay in their respective neighborhoods and communities, and they retain their original identity. And there's nothing wrong with those identities. Those identities are fantastic in their own communities. And yeah, I just like that. I've never heard that before. The melting pot is no longer melting.
I just made it up because you're so inspirational.
Oh, it's great. I'll take credit for it.
Yeah, yeah. And you, and I think it was, I keep wanting to call him Ned Devine, Waking Ned Devine, the movie. Have you seen Waking Ned Devine?
Can't say
Irish. Hilarious. I don't think it's too dated. But Devin Foley, I think, was talking with you about something, and it came across a term later that I think you've heard of, who hasn't, systemic racism and this, that, and the other thing. And parallel optics is somebody that I've written about or used quotes from him. And he came up with something that I think defines our current moment magnificently: systemic deceit. Everything is a lie. Everything is fake. There's virus theater. There's security theater. There's the DC under, locked and armed. The state capitol in Minnesota. There's the ridiculousness of all of the restrictions. Here's a virus, and for the first time in recorded history, we quarantine the healthy. Yeah. That makes sense, right? But nobody thought twice about it. And you'd also talked, I think it was you were talking about re-engineering the country. And it was in that context when you had toward the end of your show, I think last night, with Devin. And it really, I'm not much for feelings because I think we have too much of them. That's all they are. It's like, college educated white women and their feelings and their box wine and their cats at home, and that's it.
Yeah, I know a lot of those.
Well, yeah, but it's so interesting. I am my feelings. Actually, they're only a part of you, and you don't even have to go to therapy to figure that out. But they don't have control over them. They think if you're all feeling, I don't know what, you're an ascended master or something.
But the ancient scholars knew that to really become an ascended master, you need to compartmentalize your feelings and be in touch with them, use them as a compass, but know when to put them away.
Control them.
Yeah.
I'm reading the Dhammapada, and it's a concise collection of the Buddha's teachings, and I'm reading it quite slowly because it's like, okay, wow, let me try that again.
Yeah.
And something roughly analogous would be the meditations of Marcus Aurelius and a Stoic approach.
Yeah, I've read that.
And yeah, I mean, it's in print for both of them are, and they're very different traditions. But you can learn a lot going outside your bubble. But it kind of killed me. It kind of killed me, and I don't die easily. When you said, and it wasn't quite a throwaway line, but it was in a matter-of-fact way along the line that you and Devin were having the conversation. America in the 1950s is like a science fiction movie to me.
It is. I really meant that.
I believed you the first time.
Foreign. Yeah.
You don't need to double down. It killed me the first time. Stop.
Yeah.
He's already dead.
Okay.
From The Simpsons. Stop. He's already dead.
Yeah.
And I thought how tragic that is. And I'd probably talk to you about other issues if we weren't live. But they certainly were brought up in my mind's eye because I bring that up in the context of a non-melting melting pot where assimilation is affirmatively discouraged. We're importing people who hate us, not all of us. We're still stuck with that retarded boomer mindset. I know. I said retarded once on Twitter and I got lectured by a Chamber of Commerce type.
Yeah.
I don't like that word. My child is developmentally disabled. I didn't even respond. I just substituted the next tweet. I'm like, you can unfollow me,
Yeah,
block me, knock yourself out, you can report me, but you don't get to police my speech.
Mm-hmm.
Retarded is as retarded does. But the weaponization of immigrants is designed to further fracture us, again, along racial lines, because we're not exactly importing tens of thousands of people from Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic, Lithuania. You get the drift.
Yeah.
And so it's non-whites from third world countries primarily, who are then encouraged to nurse a grudge against the people who helped them, and to turn on them, weaponized immigrants. And the mindset that I was going to is as long as they come here legally. No. We need a 30-year immigration moratorium. I'll settle for 20.
I agree. But you see them talking about this overtly, and this is a nice segue because I do want to ask you why they're lifting the veil, why they're lifting the mask. But you see them literally saying that they don't want assimilation in that new CIA ad that I'm sure everybody's seen, the new CIA recruitment ad, where the tagline was something to the effect of, "I'm not afraid to occupy my space." There's no rhetoric from this lady who's, an immigrant. She comes here, or she's the children of immigrants or something, but there's no rhetoric about how I am so glad to be in America. I am so glad to become an American. I'm so glad to serve America as part of the CIA. No, it's I am unapologetically of a different identity, and I'm not afraid to occupy space as that identity in your intelligence agency. And they just come right out and say it. They disavow the idea of assimilation. Also, I see some people in chat wondering, we're on the line with John Gilmore. I know you can't see him. We're doing audio only, but this is John Gilmore. We interviewed him like 2 weeks ago now, and we're having him back.
Was it just 2 weeks ago?
It feels like longer, but I think it was just
time has taken on that stretched quality. That also does double duty, Kyle. Yes to everything that you said, and we're being bombarded with this stuff because the people in power hate this country as founded. That's really, I could say it for the rest of the show. But if you take one thing away from our discussion, the people in power hate this country as founded. The primary target are white people and families, and that dreaded monster, a heterosexual traditional Christian family.
Yep.
That has yet to be destroyed despite all of their efforts, and they know that. Until they can destroy that, they can't, as Obama put it, 5 days before the election in 2008 in St. Paul, the best things happen in the Twin Cities, I'm telling you, fundamentally transform America. He wasn't fooling around, and this is his third term, only on steroids. But that CIA Latina chick, retard, said it's also an example of the celebration parallax. I'm me, this is my heritage, this is such and such, and it's celebrated. If a white person were to say the same thing about him or herself, family and ancestors, culture and history, it would be condemned as vile and racist and bigoted. And I was talking to a friend earlier today, and she was talking about, well, we were both talking about it's 24/7 bombardment. And I said, it's disorienting at times, and it's intended to be disorienting. You're not supposed to really be able to figure out which end is up. And now here's my segue back to your question. And for those who weren't privy to the conversation last night, Devin and Kyle were talking about, and I'm going to paraphrase them both, I'm not quite sure who said which. You said the left has dropped its mask. Devin agreed. You both wondered about the timing. You said, they've put all their chips on the table, and it was sort of baffling because they're in power. There's virtually nothing right now that they don't control. And so why don't they just ride this out? Right?
Is that an accurate? They've already won. Why are they spiking the ball? Because when they spike the ball, it only makes people aware of the fact that they control everything. If they didn't kick Trump off Twitter, not as many people would be aware of the fact that they control Twitter, and so on throughout every institution.
I use the term, ladies and gentlemen, called the cathedral. It's basically an unholy alliance between academia and the media.
Mhm.
And it was invented by this guy whose pen name at the time is Moldbug. His real name's Curtis Yarvin.
Mhm.
So when I say the cathedral, it means sort of the operating system of the regime. And I don't want to anticipate too much, but I think you'll be surprised, Kyle. I think the cathedral is scared.
Hmm.
Power is a wasting asset.
Sure.
Elected political power. And even though it's tied in the Senate and they've got a deal breaker with the vice president, I think they're afraid not of Trump because he's easily gotten rid of, as you just indicated.
Mhm.
They're afraid of the people who aren't going anywhere and who are paying attention. So they don't care if they reveal themselves. They don't need Toto to pull back the black curtain. They're pulling it back themselves and saying, you know, insert your favorite expletive deleted here. You know, they're saying F you. And that's because they are riding high, maybe on their own supply, but they realize they have a limited window, and it's not 4 years. It's the first 2 years of a Biden administration. So they're going for broke. It's a wager, it's a calculated bet. But if they're correct, they win everything. They shorten the struggle. The timeline of the cultural war is shortened, and we're vanquished all that much sooner. There's no reason not to if you're afraid that you're going to lose the House and the Senate in the 2022 elections. That's my operating theory for now.
I think another thing they might be afraid of, you're probably right about that 2-year deadline. They might also be afraid of the deadline that is their own mortality. Because if you play the super long game by 2040, 2060, they'll have accomplished the demographic things they need to accomplish to, I mean, Republicans will never have a chance ever again. That's just a demographic reality. But a lot of these people are older and they might be dead by then. So I've been thinking about this more. This could be like a desperate power grab because some of these people, they're not going to be around in 20 years and they want power now and they're getting personally greedy. So they're lifting the veil and they're acting on all this infrastructure that they've laid over the last century.
No, I think that's right. I think a lot of these things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of threads or tributaries combining toward forming the river that we're seeing. And it is enormous. It's across the board, 90%.
Mhm.
And it does make you wonder, you know, what has motivated them to act with such rapidity, in some ways, reckless abandon. And if you're right, and I have a hunch you are, on that thread of one's own lifetime horizon,
Mhm.
you're going to, because in some way, be blinded to it. You know, you're in a hurry to be in a hurry. You'll underestimate and downplay any reaction to what you're doing and the rapidity with which you're doing it. I
Yeah.
think that's also a contributory factor to what's going on. You know, you add it all together and it spells mother. Well, there's a compound word I could use, and because I don't know about other people, I do have a hunch about you. There are some of us who are trying to figure out just that question, and so I was terribly intrigued when you and Devin launched into it. And I have to say, nice try at the end. Nice try, 90 seconds of, but tomorrow's another day. The sun will come out. We're alive. We have a loving God, a wonderful family.
Well,
Devin has his 7th child and coming in July. And you said something like, we just pulled it out of, it wasn't even a tailspin. Like you were nose down 100 yards from the ground. Otherwise, it was a fairly doom pill session. And if
yeah.
you go back and listen to it, it was fairly doom. And I had some interesting, it sounds like therapies, ladies and gentlemen, but it's not. This is not therapy. But it triggered something else. I used to like Trigger before they ruined it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
neoliberalism ruins everything it touches. I think it's rational and healthy to be discouraged, sometimes disoriented, and a little bit down because the assault is so great. That's the processing part of getting through it. You'd have to be not quite well to be, you know, Pollyanna in the teeth of that. That's what I'm trying to say. The trick is to not stay down, because they do want us discouraged. They want us discouraged. You know, I tell anyone who will listen to me, get down, don't stay there. Your friends, loved ones, just like you, just like me, will get down, then we'll go, okay, wait, I'm back. I'm not leaving the fight.
Exactly.
I'm still going to pay attention. I'm still not going to shut up. I'm still going to support people who I think are articulating a vision of America that, you know, I want my children and grandchildren to inherit. And that was the forward thinking that I mentioned from Brandon Peterson the last time I was on. He said that people of a similar mindset, he thought, didn't emphasize enough the future orientation of what's at stake, and consequently what it is we're doing and why.
Yeah, because it's not an election that's at stake. It truly is the fate of this American civilization. It's huge. It's huge. And I agree that it's important to indulge in the black pill a little bit, notice what's going on, feel the despair, but then use that as a motivating force. Because think about, like, at Valley Forge, the revolutionaries, they must have known for certain that they were all going to starve to death or be crushed in the springtime. Well, they weren't, and they went on to found the greatest country that's ever existed. And you can find countless instances like that through history where people pull out of their darkest moment. And sure, you can also find instances where people were simply crushed, but it does no good to focus on that, because this is real life. This is our lives. Ignoring it won't change it. Hoping won't change it. And wallowing in despair just makes you miserable, and you're wasting the one shot you have at life. So you might as well buck up, figure out how to fight, assess what your role is going to be, make some friends, and get after it.
No, I think that's exactly right. Devin referred to silos of information where we're getting information from and so on. And he thought, I think I'm doing him justice. And I understood his point that we have to go to fragmented sources of information. We no longer trust larger things. Yeah. And while that's true, I also think it's a very good thing. And I think the cathedral is still enraged that Tucker Carlson is on air, that you haven't been deplatformed. You can identify big and small players locally, regionally, and nationally, where there is a lot of information that, for lack of a better term, our side still has access to and can share with each other. They find that infuriating. I mean, I grew up dinner at 5:30, and at 5:59, I believed every weeknight, because I watched the news, I was a geek. I believed Walter Cronkite when he said, and that's the way it is. I thought that was a wrap on existence itself. I had no idea news was produced. I had no ideas there were stories they deliberately didn't cover. I had no idea that they would spin certain relatively straightforward stories in a particular way. Now everybody understands, and one of Trump's enduring legacies will be, and I think this will endure, tell me if you don't, is that fake news is now a global term. Yeah, it's a global term, and everybody in all of God's countries, 147 of them or whatever, know what is meant when you say that's fake news. They know the house organs in Turkey or South Korea or wherever, and that you're being fed a narrative designed by those in control who want you to believe something.
What's so nice about that term is the etymology of it, because Facebook actually came up with the term fake news. Facebook looked at Trump and said, oh gosh, we need to do something about this fake news. And they rolled out this censorship program under the guise of preventing fake news that was designed to basically remove stories that favorably cover Trump. In my opinion, please don't ban our live stream. But then Trump flipped it on him and he said, no. And that's the famous clip. You are fake news, because somebody was asking him a question about, what are you going to do about fake news? And he goes, no, you're the fake news. Yeah, you're the fake news. It was just perfect. And as you suggest, it's become a global phenomenon, and people were skeptical of the media before, but now it's okay to be outright suspicious of it. You're not a conspiracy.
You have to be brain dead otherwise. I mean, it's an easy litmus test. Are you thinking or not? And you're right that they came up with this term, and as Elvis Costello once sang, shot with their own gun.
Yeah, exactly.
Shot with their own gun. And it's just delicious. I mean, we kind of have to, rev up on those good things to keep going, because that discouragement, I think, is a real key psychological. Discouraged people don't fight back.
No.
Discouraged people give up in one way or another, and by degrees. It's not all or nothing all overnight. And Katie Hopkins has been around the world, and Yana and I met her more times than I can remember. And lately, I haven't checked super recently, but there was a phase earlier, late last year, maybe into early this year, where she was just doing feel-good things. I'm just here to buck you up. And I thought, well, okay, you deserve a rest, you're coasting. And then I thought a little deeper, and I'm like, she's not afraid of hard work. And
No.
yeah, they threw her out of South Africa reporting the truth about the murder of white farmers.
Yeah.
You know, you never hear much about South Africa anymore. Why is that? Wakanda.
Go
Sorry,
figure.
it's Wakanda. Yeah, but then I realized, more genius, and it was very easy to miss, at least for me, because I overthought it. You know, if you can help it, don't overthink things. Sort of an intellectual Occam's razor. She realized that discouraged and defeated people are more easily put away and sidelined and marginalized and left powerless. And so I thought, well, good for her. It was, and deservedly, it has to recharge her batteries as well, and she deserves that. So I'm taking maybe a page out of her playbook, where I say that, you know, we should yuck it up sometimes about, you know, the greatest hits, whether it's Trump or some pratfall on the left with them shooting themselves. They shoot themselves in the foot all the time. But we have to keep our spirits up. And I realize, you know, that does sound Pollyanna. I kind of resist, if not resent, the idea that because me, of all people, I'm not a nihilist, but my blog's epigram for 12 years has been from Spengler: optimism is cowardice. So that's this guy who's saying it. But if we don't, we really are giving up before we've even had time to rally, to join, to come together, to figure out the best strategy and tactics and join the fight. We're giving up before we've even begun the fight. And the fight, as you say, is foundational. It's for the future of the country, for something that, let's play grandchildren, for something that your grandchildren will recognize from your life.
Yeah.
Is it going to be same, or, you know, fundamentally transformed?
Yeah. You know, you're exactly right about the Hopkins thing. We had her on the show once, and I spoke with her once briefly off air, and she articulated that same exact idea. She said it's important to be candid, it's important to be real, but she said, you know, this is her speaking at the time, 6 months ago or so. She said,
you were on air with her, young man, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that was
a fun one to watch.
That was crazy. Yeah, we
both handled it. You don't need me to tell you this, but you both handled it very well.
Yeah, well, she has a ton of airtime experience, so I knew she would do okay. I was kind of testing my live reporting skills there a little bit, but it went all right.
You, in my view, you passed with flying colors, and it doesn't need to be said, so I'll say it. We know exactly what would happen if there was a Katie on the left and a Kyle on the left, and it was Scalia who died.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that's something else that I don't think people on the right really understand. They hate.
They want you dead.
Well, Sam Hyde. You know that quote from Sam Hyde?
They want you dead, and they think it's funny.
No, partially.
I did redact certain parts of that quote on purpose.
They want you dead, your wife raped, and your children enslaved, and they think it's funny.
Yeah,
that's not hyperbole.
Not at all.
For boomers, they just don't get it. It's sort of like, I mean, God bless them. I'm not trying to trash boomers, although given the state of the Republican Party, they're first in line for a slap with a 2x4. I mean, honest to God. But they've got this mindset that, like, if we just get the right 5-minute Dennis PragerU video to them, they'll go, oh, I get it now. I never saw.
Yeah. Even a lot of them that do get it, it doesn't do anything to understand it in a vacuum. I mean, a lot of them do get it. To what degree they understand is debatable in some cases. But it's like they're culturally isolated. They have very little influence on the thoughts and perceptions of younger generations. The college professors have a lot of influence, but unfortunately, the average grandparent doesn't pass a lot of their values down to their grandchild.
Yeah, that's a terribly sad.
It is. It's because these people have a lot to offer. I mean, they did play a role in building this country. Sure, mistakes were made along the way, but the fact that we're missing so much generational transfer of values and of ideas and of just the lens through which these people view the world is really tragic.
You unknowingly swerved into something that I saved on Twitter, and he's responding to that theme, the lack of generational transmission of knowledge, love, affection, continuity, sense of history,
Yeah.
identity. It's profound. Well, that's something else the cathedral wants us to be, is atomized individuals.
Because if
And
you're not rooted in your own family tree, there's no way you can be rooted in the broader centuries-long identity of nation.
I
It's just
can't,
impossible.
I can't improve on what you and Devin said about that last night. It was
Yeah.
absolutely uh, uh, foundational in the sense of, why are these things happening? Well, because the end result is the atomization of the individual, which
Yeah.
necessarily means the destruction of the traditional nuclear family. So here's the tweet. Grandparents paying $5,000 a month to live in an old folks home. Grandchildren who can't afford to buy a house.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right? You know, you're like,
Yeah.
damn, that's kind of grim. But that's what we've allowed to happen. And I say we allow, not as, not to be the scold on the right, wagging the finger, wah, wah. But we have to admit how bad things are before we can turn them around. But it also means, at least to my way of thinking, that when we allowed those things, that means we can change them. Now, the clock is running out on how much and how quickly, how thoroughly, how comprehensively we can make up of the lost ground. But there's no reason to think that we don't have moral agency, that we aren't, still relatively free individuals. And we're fighting for our lives, both those that came before us and those that will come after us. I feel like I have it within me to start a cult. What do you think? Should I start a cult? Jim Gilmore.
The cult of future awareness.
There you go. That's
The
right.
cult of awareness. Yeah.
Right.
We've sort of swerved into a viewer question that I want to pose really quickly. I'm keeping an eye on the clock here. It always goes fast when we're talking about these things, but we've partially addressed it, but I want to hear you talk about it explicitly. The viewer asks, what can a U.S. citizen who stands with the Constitution do now? The 2020 U.S. election was corrupt, blah, blah, blah. People feel like they're doomed. How do we secure and follow our values? And we talked a little bit about how you stay optimistic, how you stay upbeat, but do you have anything else to add to that? Maybe some tangible steps people can take in their own lives to feel like they're having forward progress?
Well, the question assumes that the Constitution, in the way that I think the questioner is using it, still exists. It both does and it doesn't. And it's, how do I want to say this? There's a good book by Michael Lind, Lind, called The New Class War.
We interviewed Lind on the show about this book.
Yeah, well then they should
Yeah,
go.
90% sure.
Well,
Yeah.
and I don't know if I should split this compliment equally, or 75% to Scott Nitzel and 25 to you, or what the proportions are. But your program, you and Scott bring an amazing set of thoughtful, wide-ranging people.
That's all Scott. Scott does all the booking. I've suggested a couple guests. I think I did
Yeah.
suggest Lind because I was doing a project for him for a college class I was in at the time, and I thought that'd be a good extra credit. But
Well, you're quite the team, and Scott
aside from that, Scott does literally all the booking.
Scott has transformed. I saw it in real time, overtime, First Tuesdays, into a real intellectual and cultural and social powerhouse. He's no fool. He knows he's got a good thing in you. Yay. So there's your, Arth now, there's your treat. But it's true. I mean, it all comes together. And I'm surprised I didn't even think that you would have. Of course you interviewed him. But anyway, the book is The New Class War. And he talks about two different kinds of constitutions, the one that we're used to, and then the civil rights, post-civil rights, unofficial constitution. And that's certainly the one that we're living in right now, because what does the Biden administration want to do? Well, the Fourth Amendment still exists, so they're going to employ big tech and private companies to snoop on this Zoom call and this conference. And I think privacy is obsolete. I had lunch with a friend yesterday who's maybe, in 5 or 8 years, still might want to run for office. And he hadn't kept up quite. I did my best in an hour. They're trying to get their kids out of the Minneapolis school system, right? Priorities, first things first. So that was cool. But he was a bit shocked when I said, I think Edward Snowden is a hero. He was like, what?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I see it. It's a matter of fact to you.
Of course. I'm hardly aware that there's people who disagree with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, and see, that's another sea change. You can see it with what's going on with you and Scott and the range of people you get to have these discussions. You can see it something routine in the decidedly left guests on Tucker Carlson, with Glenn Greenwald being the marquee name. I said, when it comes to national security and pointless wars, I'm kind of a Tulsi Gabbard Republican. And there's a lot of us. There's far more on the right than people realize. So I hope I've tried to address that question, because one, he or she is listening to you, not just on this show, but all of the ones that would strike their interest, and stay as positive as you can and network with people. As Tucker would say, have the best night with the ones you love. Because I think at some point we're going to have a backlash, but I don't know what it looks like. I don't know when it's coming, Kyle. And I think we'll be surprised by the timing, but when it happens, we'll go, oh, this is it. Didn't think it would come like this, but this is definitely it.
Yeah, we can hope. I agree with you. I think it's going to happen, but like you, I don't have any indication of when it's going to be. I want to address one more viewer question here. It's a good question, and it gets at a very interesting topic. It seems that business elites in Minnesota are both highly resistant to change, yet very susceptible to the woke message. I would posit that is a lot of elites nationally. If you agree, can you explain this apparent paradox, and how can normal populist citizens stand up to this new normal? I've been wondering this myself, because I've said it probably a dozen times on the show. It makes no sense that these massive corporations basically rely on the Republican Party for tax cuts and then turn around and spit in their face in literally every single other issue. And this abusive, masochistic relationship has drug on for decades, my entire life, and I'm sure far before that. So I like that the question is getting at that point.
It seems to me an understandable misreading. While there's been the veneer of corporatism on the Republican Party's part, they've also been painted and tagged by the cathedral with that label, when in reality, certainly today, and I think we can see the evolution of that starting. If you go back to the Democratic Leadership Council and Bill Clinton trying to tack the Democrats away from far left, more toward mainstream, and over those intervening decades, it's the Democratic Party that's the corporatist party. And so it can strike you as a bit schizophrenic, but you also have to realize that we were dead wrong. I never believed it for a minute, but it was a solid enough point. You could argue it, but it was solid. That the craziness that we're seeing everywhere was somehow, pardon the word, going to be quarantined on college campuses. But what happens?
Yeah.
Decade after decade, they pump out these idiots. They go into human resources, they go into PR, they go into communication. They occupy sort of the vanguard of cultural influencers. You add in social media, the rise of the internet, and it's become a hive mind. And it's important, I think Rush Limbaugh made this point, God rest his soul. Lois Lerner, who denied 501c3 certification to all the Tea Party groups, she didn't need a memo saying do this. She knew the enemy.
Yeah.
Somebody criticized DeSantis today for only allowing Fox News in when he signed some legislation. I forget what it was. That guy's a rock star.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, banning the media isn't a good idea. And I said, he let one in. That's not banning. And I think I introduced her to Carl Schmitt for the first time. And his point is the essential political distinction is between friend and enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to understand that there's no half measures between that. I know it sounds a bit out there, but I don't think you can overstate how dire the circumstances are and how much half of the country is despised with vigor by the other half.
Mm-hmm.
You see it on social media. I do. You read about it. It's toxic, but we're awash in it. And sometimes I'm only human, and I talk explicitly along racial lines, saying I'm going to push back. But in fact, that division, that only see color rather than not see color, is what they want. And I have to remind myself, don't feed that beast, shake it off.
You can't spiral on that issue.
You can't. No, you can't. You need to be aware of it, though. And I do think because white people have the least in-group preference, as you know, they're not aware that really it's the soft underbelly at which the attack is directed.
Mm-hmm.
They're naively good people who believe Martin Luther King when he said, not the color of our skin, but the content of our character. Those days are gone, baby. Those are gone. So I
think that white people don't have any sense of their own contribution. I dropped my microphone. I'm self-censoring. I think that white people don't have any sense of their own contributions to the world. They don't have any sense of what society would look like without them. They have no sense of what they've accomplished historically. They have no sense of their own impact on their own communities because they've been an unchallenged majority for so long. And I'm not saying this to be incendiary. I'm not saying that, one group's influence is preferential to another. I'm simply saying that, as you suggest, white people have no in-group preference because they have no awareness of what whiteness is. And then liberals come in and define whiteness as a negative. They come in and they say whiteness is evil. We need to eradicate whiteness. And this is the first time anyone's ever really thought about their own race. And they go, well, I suppose that's right. And the left has effectively rewritten the narrative of whiteness from a positive contributing force that built the West to an evil thing that has systemically corrupted the West. And people just go along with it because they've never thought about the issue before.
No, I agree. Although when you talk about white people having no awareness or self-understanding of their contribution to Western civilization, I'd suggest that the next time you say that, you don't say it to an Irishman. we're sort of, it's sort of bravado, there's even a book, How the Irish Saved Western Civilization, and it's like, please, that's a bit much. No, but you're right. The idea is everyone should take pride and sustenance from who they are and leave it there. It's there's no superiority anywhere among God's children, and what the left is trying to do is to reverse. They're trying to reverse e pluribus unum.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
that's a good note.
We've come up on an hour now. It snuck up on us. We accomplished a lot. We talked about a wide breadth of political issues. We answered some viewer questions. We waded into controversial territory that's very important to discuss, and I'm glad we did it. John, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, and Scott.
And to our viewers, thanks for watching. God bless and have a good night.